evening. Good to have you with us in this edition of the Urban Debate. Viewers, India's premier medical research institute, the one that's really been leading our fight against coronavirus, ICMR, in a sense, had a deadline of 15th of August for the COVID vaccine to be made available for public use. Yes, remember last week we had a conversation about it when we got to you the details of this letter that the ICMR had issued, which said that there will not be any excuses and any delays will not be accepted in a nice way. Simply put, ICMR said that by 15th of August we should have an announcement to make about the vaccine. Now, here is the big concern. While yes, it is important and everybody is in a rush and everybody is in a race to find a COVID vaccine, there is no other solution right now, and that's the only hope the whole world has. While yes, the whole world is rushing towards it, experts and every single scientist or medical research expert that I have spoken to has said that it will at least take 6 months to 1 year. Then what is it that we expect by mid-August was the big question we had asked. Now this story has only gotten more interesting because just a couple of days after that ICMR letter that became controversial, we actually had the Science Ministry say that the vaccine will come by 2021. Which frankly sounds more reasonable and logical as per what the experts also say. Then, 1 day later, yesterday, the Science Ministry changed that statement and deleted a reference, deleted this entire paragraph, which actually spoke about the vaccine by 2021. This even as the ICMR issued another statement standing by its earlier one. So no, ICMR has not said that mid-August was a typo, that they actually meant 2021. ICMR stands by its deadlines. The Science Ministry has changed its own statements and now is trying to match to what the research agency has to say. But the experts don't seem very convinced. Now you may ask, what's the harm? We set ourselves a deadline. It may happen, it may not happen. And that's all fine. But it is critical to note the kind of language that was used in that letter. It is critical to note that there have been, in no uncertain ways, it has been said that this is the top priority and it must be done. And so there are concerns that if you build such kind of a pressure, what are the results you get? What are the pitfalls of a rushed vaccine research program? What are the pitfalls of a rushed vaccine development that has not been tested long enough, that has not been tested on enough people? Is it really worth the rush? That's the big question. Now, I just have the questions. I have experts who are actually going to be telling us more about it, but I just want to put this in perspective. It took 47 years, viewers, for us to find a vaccine for polio. It took us 36 years for a vaccine for yellow fever, 12 years for influenza, 9 years for measles. Granted, this is 2020. Science has progressed a lot since these vaccines were actually worked upon. But 3 months or 6 months for a vaccine, is that really practical is the big question. Let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining us this evening. Professor Sudhir Krishna, National Center for Biological Sciences, Rajib Dasgupta, visiting faculty, Global Disease Epidemiology Control Program at Johns Hopkins School for Public Health, and he's a professor for community health at JNU, Dr. Tanmay Mahapatra, medical doctor and epidemiologist. Let me begin with Professor Krishna. Professor Krishna, there is a lot of controversy regarding these deadlines. What is your own view about this controversy?
Well, thanks for having me on the program. First, my information is from the newspapers and others, so I don't have access from ICMR or DST or the other agencies directly. I sympathize with the urgency of the system. I think globally, what you hear and what you read, whether it's Oxford, whether you're hearing stories out of the US, everybody's in an urgent phase right now to get a vaccine. So I sympathize with the urgency of the system. I think putting a deadline of this sort was probably with that intention, but it had inadvertent consequences of creating the illusion that we would have everything ready by August 15th. Vaccines are complex business, and I don't think you can actually have a vaccine roll out by August 15th. So that's the sort of balanced answer that I would give. And I'm happy to hear from the other panelists. I can elaborate as we move along in the show.
Okay, let me get in opening comments from our other panelists as well. Mr. Dasgupta, what is your own view? By August 15th, can we have a vaccine, or can we even finish the current phase that we are in?
Well, there are a number of candidate vaccines being trialed globally. In the published journals, some of these milestones that each of these companies claim are available. The earliest that we have is November or December 2020, but remember, these are trials which have started much earlier, and at the time of publication of these have actually moved into phase 3, which is not the case with the vaccine we are discussing. And some of the other vaccines, including vaccines in China, have target dates or estimated target dates between 2022 and 2024. That's the global picture. Of course, there are concerns about whether one should announce a deadline or not. The answer obviously is that many companies have indeed announced their milestones. So that in itself is not really problematic. The issue is that being able to successfully move through all the phases, and as the public health ethicists have been arguing, not in the case of this vaccine, but in general, that open, transparent processes are actually very crucial to having a faith of the people, because we are going to deal with large populations when it comes to immunizing. And therefore, these controversies are certainly not inimical in that sense.
Okay. Dr. Tanmay Mahapatra, but many say, there are those who want to believe, hope, who say that why ask these questions? Maybe, just maybe, India can actually do this. Our own scientists can actually find something by August 15th.
Yeah, having a vaccine is the need of the hour, no question about it. And a vaccine can not always go through the ideal textbook related processes. That's what the recent publication by Lurie et al. In New England Journal of Medicine is also talking about, that we need to have a particular process to expedite the process of approval and all those things. But we have to be sure that we understand that that is not by bypassing the actual process of different phases, as our panelists also mentioned. For a vaccine to be in the market, as it has been mentioned that it will be by 15th August, it needs to go through several phases, and each of the phase has its own kind and on its own requirements, and it needs to be tested over a certain sample size for each of the phases to show that we have gone through the adversities, the safety, efficacy, and all other kind of things that we need to test before having a dead vaccine. Now, definitely government can have, Indian scientists can actually ensure that a vaccine can come into place, and this particular effort is something that we all support from internally and externally. But the point is, we have to be sure that we are following the whole process, and without knowing exactly which stage the vaccine is, the trial is, it's very tough to expect or even believe that within 15th August, we'll have a vaccine, because as much as the reports and other things talk about, this vaccine not even crossed its phase 1 or phase 2, and the initial approval for those were only for that. So in that case, we have to wait. We have to see how these things actually unfolding. And before that, having announced the deadline doesn't seem like that much practical. But we definitely need to understand that it will go through proper checks and balances so that there is no adversities to which the population is exposed. It's a killed vaccine, so it is not likely that much to have the other very high side effects of different kind of the live vaccines have. But still, before a certain period of time of a few quite months, I don't see a vaccine in the market.
Okay, so that's one aspect of it. Now let me come to the second part, which is more to do with trying to understand then why is it that the ICMR and the government seem to be putting out these signals, and what are the pitfalls if we rush through it. And then the third part will be, realistically speaking, by when can we see a vaccine. But Professor Krishna, to the second part, ICMR's clarification statement says that, well, our intention is only to cut through the red tape, but we are going to follow the norms that globally are being followed for a fast-tracked vaccine. That being said, should we then assume that it means that mid-August is not going to be possible, and they are also admitting that?
So I think there are two issues out here, and I think the panelists have been fairly clear about their points on the August 15th issue. So let me actually talk about a couple of other things. I think when you say you have a vaccine ready, there are many components to a vaccine. There's the product, there's the delivery system, there's the population that you take on. All these are issues. There's the whole manufacturing process, and each one of these goes into a vaccine. So if you're creating a vaccine ecosystem in India, you would want a product. You want to know the genetic diversity locally. For example, Chitra Pattabhiraman in NIMHANS with Dr. Ravi, a senior colleague, has just done a very elegant study of sequencing coronaviruses in Karnataka state, where they've been looking at all the lineages. I think she's classified it in 6 different outbreaks. So you want that kind of information, for example, to try and build a consensus. And I think you have to stop looking at ICMR purely from that viewpoint and give them the benefit of doubt that they're trying to push this process at a very complex time. And this is true world over. And so I don't think one should go on and on about this one point. While it's perfectly reasonable to bring it up, I think one should look at the larger vaccine ecosystem.
Okay, I understand the point that you're making, Professor Krishna, that, there are various stages to it. And it's not even, I will also say that it's not even if we find the vaccine, immediately everybody is going to be able to get access to it, especially in a country like India. That process itself is going to take a long time. But my concern stems from the fact that if there is a very vocal, open pressure like this, what are the pitfalls involved? What if people then start rushing through the whole process, don't do enough number of trials or widespread amount of trials? That becomes the big concern. And that is where I want to understand from you and bring in your expertise of the kind of process that has to be followed and how rigorous it really needs to be.
So if I'm still the person answering the questions, I think I don't speak for ICMR. And as I said, I don't have inside knowledge. But I will give them the benefit of doubt that I don't think this one letter refers to the fact that they're not going to follow due process. Historically with ICMR, actually, the criticism is they're too cautious and they don't do enough innovation. They don't do enough risk. And if you look at the vaccine industry in this country, we've become one of the largest manufacturers of a certain category of vaccines, but we do very little vaccine innovation. So suddenly, actually, the conversation that I'm hearing is a criticism of ICMR that they're being attacked for being innovative, they're being fast, they're rushing through process. But for the last 30 years that I've heard of the conversation with ICMR, you're actually attacking them for not doing enough fast enough. So I think they're sort of damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. And I think one needs a mature conversation which understands their pressures, their challenges, their shortage of resources. Health systems don't develop overnight. I think so. I think, thank you for having this conversation, but this conversation cannot be a single point or a single point in the letter.
No, not not at all. And that's absolutely not the point, in fact, which is why we have multiple experts on this panel to say, where do we go from here? So, for example, Mr. Dasgupta, what is the rigorous process that one needs to follow for a vaccine? For our viewers to understand the various stages involved, the kind of testing that's involved, and the scale of testing that may be needed for a vaccine for an infection like coronavirus.
Well, essentially, there are three phases. The phase 1, which is roughly 20 to 100 healthy volunteers. The key questions in phase 1 are, is the vaccine safe? Does it seem to work? And are there any serious side effects? The phase 2, which is typically several hundred volunteers, essentially deal with two questions. What are the most common short-term side effects? And how are the volunteers' immune systems responding to the vaccine? And this really is critical because, as we have seen, the COVID-19 as a disease has extremely varied manifestations depending on age, whether you have comorbidity, and so on and so forth. It's really phase 3, which is the biggest challenge, which is hundreds or up to thousands of volunteers. And this is the phase which actually takes a whole lot of time, which addresses, again, how do people who get the vaccine and people who do not get the vaccine compare, which is the randomized controlled trial, ideally. Then, is the vaccine safe? Is the vaccine effective? And what are the common side effects? Also, the fact that vaccines are made in batches, what are called lots, and therefore all lots need to be tested. And then it goes to the stage where the National Technical Advisory Group is going to evaluate the vaccine, is going to recommend the vaccine for program or for specific beneficiary groups. And it is then that vaccine actually enters the stage of uptake or administration, and there is also post-marketing surveillance. Now, the catch is that there is a failure rate at each of these phases, which is something to keep in mind. If all vaccines succeeded, then we wouldn't take years to develop vaccines, as you outlined at the very beginning of your program. So each of these phases in the trials have a certain failure rate. But on the other hand, what is important in the COVID context is there is something called a human challenge study, HCS, where one can actually reduce the numbers, relatively speaking, in phase 3. And that's what most of these vaccine developers are banking on. So it is not that, as Professor Krishna said, that everything which is happening is wrong or wrongly motivated and so on. But yes, there are steps, but there are also newer technologies, there are newer techniques that allow us to shorten, relatively speaking, but all phases come with their uncertainty. So it is a mix of all these things. And that also means that a final date is very uncertain. Yet, as I said at the beginning, all companies are coming out with final dates, but it depends on which phase they are in.
Okay, it all depends on which phase they are in. Now, let me also ask one other question, Dr. Tanmay Mahapatra, maybe you can come in on that. The ICMR also said that we are, of course, going to follow the norms which are globally being observed right now to fast-track vaccine development. Now, in this process that has just been, explained here, what are the aspects that can actually be shortened? How do we fast-track a vaccine development program without, of course, compromising on the health and the safety part?
So, as we have discussed before also, while developing a vaccine, there are several stages that we need to follow. And given the current development in the vaccine research and every research in the world, we have different kind of techniques and other stuff. One of those exemplified by one of the knowledgeable panelists just before. So those are the processes where we can expedite some of the techniques through which we can cross the safety, efficacy, immunogenicity, those kind of things. But there are other aspects like the administrative part and the approval part. For those things, we often find that there are procedural delays. I understand that in this current scenario, in a very commendable way, because ICMR is trying to ensure that those procedural delays are not there, and based on those efforts to ensure that when one stage is actually properly addressed, and after that there is the start of the next phase of the trial, and there are several phases as we were discussing. There is also after the safety efficacy trial, there is also a marketing trial and the field trial. So given all these things, we have to ensure that after the completion of one phase, we are not having some lag time and latency time while heading to the next phase. And if there is proper preparedness, there can be considerable reduction in delay can be made on this. And these procedural delays and administrative aspects actually, if minimized, they can really help the overall availability of a vaccine which has been tested to be working in this particular scenario to be available in the market faster. But on the other hand, I want to highlight one more point. We are dealing with a vaccine, we are talking about a vaccine dealing with a virus about which the pathogenicity is low and infectivity is high, this much we know. But the problem is the total number of strains isolated and the strains those are actually working here, those can always change. And based on that, it is actually not only a single isolated process of vaccine development, it's a combination of the research in molecular epidemiology as well as this vaccine development process, which together needs to go hand in hand. And I believe ICMR being the head body of research in India actually paying attention to all those to ensure that we are going to have a vaccine that is not only efficacious but also effective, because in this particular disease we are going to have cases where there are a lot more asymptomatic cases. So in that case, all the strains is not easy to identify because we are only testing a part of all the cases. So when we are having a vaccine to ensure that the population is no more, if exposed, no more susceptible to get the vaccine, get the disease, we have to have the vaccine potent enough to be active against all the strains. And we also have to understand that different kind of complex processes are taken care of, like the cross immunity and all those stuff. So for those scenarios, I believe ICMR actually planning to have the whole picture in mind. And the only thing which is surprising is companies can announce different kind of deadlines for their target, but in a research having the target set earlier is not that easy. There may be some miscommunication, but this overall effort is quite commendable.
Sure. I just also want to highlight, what some of the others have also, the way they have reacted, also to focus specifically on why everybody believes that it is going to take a much longer time. For example, Indian Academy of Sciences has gone on to say that, of course, the announced timeline is unfeasible, but a hasty solution may compromise the scientific process and standards. Mr. Randeep Guleria, and he's been on our channel, on our show so many times, and he himself, the AIMS director himself, said that the deadline is very challenging and a difficult task, because you have to look at both the efficacy as well as the safety of any vaccine, that the challenge process of mass production of the vaccine also has to be kept in mind. We also had former ICMR head Soumya Swaminathan also speak on it and say that it is important that there is a rigorous process which is followed. WHO actually recommends a phase 3 trial should involve about testing on 20,000 to 30,000 people. So imagine the time that it will just take just for that phase itself. And in many other cases, a vaccine could actually take years. We also had, the CSIR director, Dr. Agarwal, say that you do not usually find a perfect dose in one go. And finding the right dose is very important, at this trial stage. So looking at 1 year at least by following the most ethical way. So one aspect, of course, that's come out, and which is what our experts have also spoken, is finding the right dose, and that can take some amount of time. Professor Krishna, even once we do believe that we found the right combination, the right dosage, something that seems to be working, the next stage itself, help us understand that. How long before we are able to get on the stage of a mass production? to be able to actually ensure that people can start using it?
So let me clarify one thing very clear. I was supportive of ICMR and this whole idea of driving innovation and urgency. If you really look at the vaccine landscape, and let's take the dengue vaccine, Sanofi, which introduced a mass vaccination in the Philippines, had to stop their vaccination because of issues with children and seronegativity. The next year, the Philippines had a huge dengue breakout, and they were wondering whether they should still have the vaccine with their challenges or whether they should not have those vaccines. So vaccination is a very complicated space, and I don't think the argument that I'm talking about is the fact that the vaccine is going to give you an immediate solution. One can be cautiously optimistic that maybe in certain specific groups, maybe the vaccine will work, but it's very unlikely that the same vaccine will work everywhere in all groups and continue to work consistently. That's not been the case for any vaccine pretty much. Even if you look at poliomyelitis, many things changed over time. With influenza, of course, that's the most obvious example where you have to change every year. So I think the point really is that if you have a product and you get the ball rolling, hopefully you have innovation. And so long as you bear in mind that this vaccine is one component of your entire response, and you can't get away from all the other issues that are involved in this complex scenario.
Okay, so you're saying that even if we do find it, it probably won't be the solution or won't be applicable to everybody, even if it's something that here in India we are working on, it may still not be something that will work for every Indian?
That's very likely that the vaccine will take time to find which group it works very well. Remember that all the heterogeneity that you heard about when the coronavirus outbreak happened, in terms of the spectrum of infection, the spectrum of genetics, the spectrum of diet, the spectrum of nutrition, the spectrum of economic conditions, every one of those issues is now going to play out again when you roll out the vaccine. Because it is still an immune response, right? And that immune response is going to happen with whether you have a vaccine or whether you have an infection. So it is going to be a complicated process. And I think so long as one is cognizant of the fact that you have systems in place, they're transparent, you're pushing along, you've got private-public partnerships, all those are good things, even if you can't get a vaccine out, as a miracle drug, which is very unlikely.
Okay, Mr. Rajiv Gupta, do you want to comment on that point, especially because in a country like India, which has a huge diversity of people, of their health systems, the fact that it is any which was going to be a challenge to roll something like this out on a large scale immediately and will take time itself. What's your own view on what Professor Krishna is saying here?
Well, Professor Krishna made extremely valid points. And to take that forward, there is a huge optimism which is resting on vaccines, and it's not just India but globally. Everyone seems to think that a vaccine, whoever is manufacturing it, is just about around the corner and it's going to magically solve everything, which it won't. Also, the fact that this is one vaccine which is really going to be quote unquote universal in demand. It's not a specifically child vaccine or a specifically adult vaccine or a specific vaccine for pregnant women and so on. There are going to be multiple competing demands. China, for example, has decided to prioritize the armed forces as one of the beneficiary groups. India has decided to prioritize healthcare workers as a priority group. So there are going to be such competing demands. Also, that a vaccine is, much as we would like to believe, it's not really an altruistic endeavor. These are extremely commercial products. This is a very competitive market, and it comes with its own political economy. And finally, no controversy has ever been good for any vaccine. And therefore, it's extremely important that governments, regulatory authorities, manufacturers, researchers are transparent about the process and it's proactively communicated rather than the kind of discourse we are currently witnessing.
Yes, and because you brought that up, the fact is that on day one, we weren't even too sure if there should be a controversy, simply for a reason because it just didn't sound like something that even ICMR would say, and the language that was used in the letter to create that, that kind of a sentiment that this is high priority, this must be done, there is nothing else, that we need this by August 15th. But ICMR's clarification statement has been silent on the deadline. That being said, I'm glad we had the three of you here today to really help our viewers understand how realistic that is or isn't, and irrespective of if there is an announcement on August 15th, what does it really mean? What does the whole journey of vaccine research and development really mean? And how long before we come to it, to a point where it will actually be available for people? Available for people to be vaccinated with a chemical or a drug that has been approved, and that, viewers, in most ways is far, far away, even if there is one thing that we're able to talk about in about a month and a half from now. But thank you so much to our panelists who've joined us right now on this conversation. What became even more interesting and really made this entire story a lot more curious was the fact that the government and the science ministry itself actually went back on its word and removed an entire paragraph that was there in their statement, which actually spoke about a vaccine perhaps by mid next year or later, by 2021. And now that part is missing. So clearly within the government there is an understanding or a thought process that we need to move fast on it. Viewers, that being said, over 100 vaccine research trials projects are on across the world. About 120. 18 of them in advanced stage. A very crucial one here in India itself that is being done by Bharat Biotech, and of course ICMR is very closely tracking that. So yes, there is hope, but you heard the experts. It's a long way from actually being able to use this in a large scale, in a large beneficial scale. Meanwhile, you and I have to keep the basics in mind. Meanwhile, we have to ensure that we protect ourselves, we protect those around us, we follow the social distancing norms, we keep away, we keep indoors unless we absolutely have to step out. When we do, we follow all terms of precaution, and we build our immunity system, we build our own health condition to be stronger. That's what we can do until the medical fraternity and the scientists actually find us that miracle drug. I'm completely out of time on this conversation. Thank you to our panelists for joining us, but don't go anywhere. This is just one part of it. There's another big conversation point that's going on in the scientific circles about coronavirus right now, and that's to do with some scientists claiming that yes, it is an airborne disease and the airborne transmission is very much a reality. Is that so? WHO keeps saying there isn't enough scientific evidence. We're going to talk about that on the other side. Stay with me. Welcome back. Viewers, things have gotten really interesting with over 200 scientists, 239 scientists from 32 countries to be precise, writing a letter to the World Health Organization claiming that there is evidence that novel coronavirus is actually airborne. And they have urged upon the WHO to revise its recommendations for dealing with coronavirus. Now, these scientists have actually outlined the evidence showing how smaller particles can infect people. Smaller particles that get sprayed into the air because somebody, spits it out while talking or while sneezing or otherwise. and those smaller particles can carry the infection. This is what the scientists, these 239 scientists are claiming, and they say, which is why it is extremely essential for people to use masks all the time, including when they are indoors. Even if you're in a public indoor place with not good ventilation, it could get risky. Your whole way of handling coronavirus could actually change the way half the world is dealing with it. Now, it's a lesson of a concern for you and I, because any which ways in our country, every time you step out, you have to wear a mask. And that's something that we've all now inculcated in ourselves, and we, ensure that every single one of us follows it. But the larger conversation, that's what I want to have right now. And what is very interesting is that on 29th of June itself, just like a week ago, WHO actually said that there isn't enough evidence right now to suggest that this virus is airborne and that the research is inconclusive. So, what do we do? Should we wait for more research? Should we start taking more precautions already? Is there enough evidence to go one way or the other? That's the big question. And I've got very special guests joining us this evening for this conversation. Let me quickly go across to our first guest, Dr. David Nabarro, WHO's special envoy for COVID-19, joins us. Thank you so much, Dr. Nabarro, for being with us. It's been a while since we last spoke with you, but great to have you with us again. Your views, Dr. Nabarro, on this entire controversy that has been sparked again, whether or not the coronavirus can be an airborne transmitted disease.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you for the chance to go through this. First of all, how is the virus usually spread? Answer, I'm absolutely certain, as are most other colleagues, that the normal spread is via the droplets that are produced when we talk, when we cough, when we sneeze, indeed when we breathe. Now, these droplets, by and large, don't travel more than about a meter, perhaps a bit over a meter, which is why we've been suggesting stay more than 2 meters apart from people if you want to reduce the risk. Now, the new evidence that's being cited in the letter from the scientists is as follows. As well as these droplets, there's also the possibility that even smaller particles carrying virus can emerge from the mouth, and they're capable of traveling further than this 2 meters distance that we talk about. Well, we've always thought that there were possibilities. We weren't sure how many of people getting infected through aerosolized transmission. But we've said that this is not the normal pattern. And I want to stress this. We keep trying to offer guidance based on what we think is most commonly happening, because we're all of us trying to make sense of this and we want to try to work it out. So we have to err on the side of what we believe to be the majority situation. And what the scientists who are writing the letter about now want to say is, could you perhaps also include in your advice the possibility of aerosol transmission? Okay, so then my question back to them would be, what difference is it going to make to the advice that we give? You've summarized it. We need to be trying to be more than 1 meter and ideally 2 meters distance from other people, especially in public settings, to reduce the risk of spread. We also need to be wearing face protection, absolutely essential in order to reduce the risk. But the added threat, I think, that we have to include now, if we're going to take this into account, is a slightly greater distance is needed in certain settings where aerosol transmission is more likely. So I come to my last point. Where is this likely to happen? Answer, when people are shouting, singing, or in any other way really producing a much greater force when they are breathing. So if I am in a choir practice, or if I'm in a karaoke bar, or if I'm at a match watching cricket or football, and I need to really express myself strongly, I am likely to shout loudly or sing. And if I do that, then there seems to be a risk of aerosolized transmission. And that is now being factored in because the evidence suggests that it does sometimes occur. But I want to then finish by saying at base, we need to think about the commonest modes of transmission. And our current thinking is still that droplet spread is the commonest mode. I hope that's helpful. Back to you.
Yes, that indeed is helpful, Dr. Nabarro, and forgive me for asking this if it sounds a little silly, but because there is already a guideline or a suggestion and recommendation that people should wear masks, and in countries like India, it's a rule that you have to wear a mask every time you step out. Then does the distance matter, whether you're maintaining 1 meter or 6 meters or 2 meters of distance if you're already wearing a mask? And does it matter what kind of mask we are wearing?
So thank you again for the question. It is really important that people do get very clear in their minds that you have to practice all the precautions together. The mask is important. I'm just going to put mine on. It's really important that when a mask is on, it covers the nose and the mouth, that it is tight fitting and that it is worn constantly, and that you don't end up at any time taking it half off like this and imagining that's protecting you. It doesn't. So please always wear the mask. Secondly, please do the physical distancing as well, because a mask does not provide complete protection. You still get some air coming out or in around the sides of the mask. So the physical distancing is really important. Thirdly, please try to make sure that you have got a mask that is covering all aspects of your nose and your mouth. I have seen some people wearing incomplete masks, and I want them to please be diligent about it. Lastly, if you've got any symptoms, you should stay out the way. You should not be out in public at all, because it's really preventing yourself from spreading to others that is so important. Back to you.
Okay, Dr. Nabarro, since I have you with me right now, here in India right now, there's a huge controversy going on about the vaccine research. And, the Indian Medical Research Agency, ICMR, seems to have suggested a timeline that involves perhaps having some kind of announcement by mid-August. Now, I wanted to understand your view, since I'm sure you're tracking the various trials and, projects happening across the world. Realistically speaking, when should we, hope to get a vaccine from anywhere, any part of this world?
Thank you. The first thing about a vaccine is showing that it is capable of inducing antibodies in a person who is immunized, and that those antibodies are effective in preventing against the disease, and that the vaccine itself is safe and does not have any side effects. So getting that candidate and doing the early tests is step one. And I would hope that we're going to see quite a lot of announcements in the next few months where that step one of having candidate vaccines is there. Step two is to go through the necessary trials, and they're called phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials that are needed to confirm that it works and that it is safe. That takes a finite amount of time, certainly more than 6 months, and it may take longer still, because it depends on what the results are. And then thirdly, you've got to then manufacture the vaccine in sufficient quantity that it can be given to everybody who needs it, and you have to organize the vaccination program. That's likely to be a lot longer still. So if we can be clear, having candidate vaccines should come pretty soon. Going through the trials could take 6 months or longer. Having sufficient vaccine that's available to give to everybody and administering it will be longer still. And that's why I'd like people not to think in terms of having a vaccine that's ready for everybody in less than 2 or 2.5 years.
2 and 2.5 years. That's really interesting. Dr. David Nabarro, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us here on the Urban Debate.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well, there you heard it from the special envoy on COVID-19 to the WHO. Dr. Nabarro actually saying that, yes, well, if you consider what the scientists are saying, that will change the way people respond to COVID. You will have to maintain a larger distance, because while we are saying right now that the transmission of the virus happens via droplets, if they are staying longer in the air and traveling a longer distance, then you have to be even more careful and wear that mask constantly. For more understanding on this, we also have Dr. Ram Vishwakarma, Director for the CSIR. Good evening, Dr. Vishwakarma, and thank you so much for speaking with us. Again, I want to ask you this question as well. You know, in India, we have been extremely careful, Dr. Vishwakarma. We are already wearing these masks. In many cases, we get penalized in many parts of our country if we don't. So we are taking that precaution. But if we are to accept what the scientists are saying, that coronavirus can be transmitted by air, it's an airborne transmission disease, what changes then?
See, we have known this for long time, that most of these viruses spread through aerosols. Now, what this new argument that are being made is actually reinforcing that there is a possibility that you have normal size of these droplet is around 20 micrometer. But if they evaporate moisture from those, then they can become smaller, which is like 4 to 5 micrometer. And then they can stay longer, around 20 minutes in the air. And if 5 people are sitting together having conversation, there is a likelihood of transmission. So this is reinforcing that even when we are discussing in the group, maintaining physical distancing, it is absolutely necessary to have mask on. I think it is simply reinforcing the parameter that we have been advised from the beginning of the pandemic. This is like giving more importance to wearing mask. I don't think this is something alarmist about it. People should simply be more responsible for their own health and health of other people. And this also will vary depending on the humidity of the area that you are sitting in. So if it is very dry area, these droplet will dry faster and convert to droplet nuclei, in scientific term, which are smaller. But if humidity is very, if it is a high humidity area, then the rate of evaporation will be slower. So I think this will vary from place to place, but it is important that now these arguments that are being given now gives more priority to wearing proper quality masks.
Yes, in fact, I was going to ask you, does this, change significantly the quality of the mask we're using? Because right now, we're simply going with a piece of cloth and saying that that's enough. And people are beginning to step out in larger numbers now. And considering that it's a high-density population country, social distancing beyond a point becomes really difficult in public places, in market areas. So are there extra precautions that we as Indians have to take then, Doctor?
I don't think so. Actually, what masks we are wearing are good enough. It's a basically physical barrier for these particles not to go into, say, even people are wearing the cotton mask or N95 mask. I don't think it's going to impact on the quality of mask you are wearing. It just reinforces that please wear this mask all the time, particularly having conversation like Dr. Nabarro was saying, particularly when people are speaking loudly. When you speak loudly, these droplet and droplet nuclei stay for, like I said, they have the 2 papers that have been published in Proceedings National Academy of Sciences. They show that it actually stays in the air for 15-20 minutes. So even half an hour meeting will infect those many people sitting there. So it's absolutely necessary that mask must be worn. It doesn't make any difference. I will not say that you change your mask or panic about it. Simply use the regular method of wearing mask. It is, I would say, more scientific light on we were practicing. Now you have more evidence you have that what you are practicing is right. So please enforce it with more sincerity and during your conversation, during meetings. And I think that's all. And also be careful that you are not sitting in one place which is closed place and where there's larger chances of these kind of particles staying there. So, and the places where people are sitting, they must be sanitized after every meeting. So these droplet ultimately will settle down to surface. And when somebody is walking, somebody touching so that will happen. So I think sanitization after any sitting, any interaction is important. People, when they are walking outside, it is important to maintain physical distance and make sure that during walking also, like you see in colonies, people are not really careful about wearing masks. They think they are outside, so they're all right. That's not all right. You have to wear mask even if you are walking, cycling, driving, whatever you are doing. It has to become part of your day-to-day routine.
No, okay, I understand what you're saying, Dr. Vishwakarma, but so here is my question then. Do you believe that irrespective of what we were doing in India or what we believed here, on a global basis, WHO will have to now change its recommendations and what its stand has been on coronavirus and the way it spreads in the light of what these scientists are saying and the new evidence that has emerged?
Yeah, I think not so much for India, but you must be watching. A lot of people, in particular in the United States of America, have been very, very careless in terms of wearing masks. And situation in Florida, you see, Florida people initially ignored when it was spreading in New York. So I think it is messages for those countries where people are not disciplined enough, which they are not following the norms and they are going against it. I think that's a problem. Europe has followed this very diligently. You see, graph of Europe almost came back to the level where they were three months ago. And United States of America is going up and up. So I think it's for those countries. In India, definitely we have been very careful. People are sincere enough, but still it's a message to younger people who think that they cannot be infected. It's important that even if you are asymptomatic, you are likely to spread that virus to your family members. So it's very important to take this scientific advice, what has come additional. Don't put it against WHO or anybody. Science moves with new evidence. We have a new evidence now, and I will be very happy to embrace this evidence and suggest that now most important thing is now wearing mask, among other things. So sequence of priorities has changed.
Okay. Yes, and the other thing that I wanted to ask you was, Dr. Vishwakarma, as far as now studies and evidence suggests, to what extent does the virus stay on the surfaces? How long does it stay on surfaces? Even for people to understand what's more dangerous and what's more potent, there has always been a big controversy about stuff that you are touching, buying, bringing home, or surfaces that you may be touching when you step out. What is the latest scientific evidence there?
Yeah, we have evidence. Almost several publications are there. 72 hours, 48 to 72 hours is important. So whenever you are bringing anything from outside, it's better to keep outside for at least 1 day, 1.5 days. And that's so 48 hours to 72 hours is better not to, unless you are sanitizing that item which you are bringing. So I think that much we understand that this long this virus will survive. Now this virus will survive on certain surfaces longer, for example, wooden surfaces or metal surfaces. So there is a variability, but more or less 48 hours to 72 hours is reasonable time to sort of be careful. That's why sanitizing your surfaces every 24 hours is very important. When you start your office, start your restaurant, start your activity, it's better to sanitize this.
All right, Dr. Vishwakarma, thank you so much. I really appreciate the fact that you've joined us this evening and you've clarified all our doubts. On a daily basis, obviously, we are finding more things. There is more evidence that emerges, and a lot of the things that we thought 3 months ago are now very different. But one good takeaway from my conversation with you has been that in India, we've always been careful, okay, and we've always been wearing the mask and following that rules. And it seems now more people across the world are now beginning to say that yes, there is a danger that the droplets that carry the infection stay in the air for longer than what we thought earlier, travel in the air a bigger distance than what we thought earlier, and so it becomes even more important that we wear this mask. Viewers, this just goes on to show that you cannot let your guard down. There is now more and more evidence that suggests that these are the precautions that are extremely important right now to be followed in the light of any drug, in the light of the absence of any drug that cures coronavirus, and there are few that have been tried, but there is no short way to know, especially for serious cases, in the light of the fact that the vaccine development process is still on and we are far away from getting our hands on a vaccine. It is very important that we follow this one basic rule. Don't touch the surfaces, clean your surfaces around you before you put your hands anywhere, wear your gloves and wear your mask. That's the only thing that you and I can do on our part. Maintain your distance. Whatever distance we were following, perhaps even more if indeed coronavirus is an airborne transmitted disease. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation. Some news coming in. High Power Committee instated to probe the unfortunate Vizag gas leak incident has submitted a comprehensive 4,000-page report that has been submitted, and largely it's the company that has been held accountable and responsible for not following the norms, for not ensuring that the safety protocol measures were followed. Somit, in fact, is joining me with more details right now. Somit, take us through the details.
Well, after the gas leak tragedy reported in Venkatapuram in Vizag district on May 7th, which has taken 11 lives and over 500 people have suffered irritations. And we have also noticed that immediately after the incident, the AP Chief Minister has to probe the incident, has made the High Power Committee, and the High Power Committee instated to probe extensively into unfortunate this incident, has submitted a comprehensive 4,000 annexure page to Chief Minister in his camp office today, and the committee has stated many root cause of the incident, stating that poor design of the tank, inadequate refrigeration and faulty cooling system, absence of circulation and mixing system, and the inadequate measures and parameters, poor safety protocol, poor safety awareness, and inadequate risk assessment response, and many other reasons were also stated in that findings. And finally, after these many days, the committee has submitted this report to the Chief Minister, and we are yet to be see that what action will be initiated, because earlier a case was also registered by the Vizag police on the company and on the various sections of Indian Penal Code. But till now, no arrests have been made by the concerned enforcement agencies, because they have also asked around 8 main people to not leave the country without prior permission. But they have also approached the High Court and they have taken the permission. But till now, no arrests have been made. So we have to wait and see who will be held responsible, because the committee has clearly stated that the negligence is from the company side, and the company has violated many norms. So we have to wait and see who will be held responsible and how many will be arrested. So will be justice done or not?
All right, Tom, thanks so much for bringing us that update. Well, moving on, a huge controversy and another political war of words broke out between the BJP and the Congress, with the BJP president actually tweeting that Rahul Gandhi had skipped the standing committee meetings on defense, and highlighting the fact that while he doesn't think twice before questioning the forces and demoralizing our soldiers, he himself has been irresponsible enough to skip these very crucial meetings. So that obviously led to a war of words between the Congress and the BJP. Listen in.
This family has interest in defense matters only as far as commissions are concerned, whether it is the Bofors deal, the HDW submarine deal of the Rajiv Gandhi era, or the Augusta Westland and many other scandals that happened during the UPA era. I think the family has been accused of several such defense scandals, and the family takes a lot of interest, the dynasty takes a lot of interest in those areas, but not in real matters concerning the armed forces and strengthening their morale.
ये बात इस सरकार को समझनी चाहिए कि हेडलाइन मैनेजमेंट की एक सीमा होती है, वो सीमा बहुत दिनों से पहले पार हो चुकी है। अब कुछ नया करना चाहिए और हमारी सलाह इस सरकार को ये है कि कोई नया टैक्टिक न लाएं, तथ्यों पर उत्तर दें, तथ्यों के प्रश्न हैं, तथ्यों के ही उत्तर होने चाहिए।
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of the Urban Debate. Thank you so much for joining us.